Would you believe that this vintage buffet only cost me $20 on Marketplace? If we haven't met yet, I'm Jade. I'm a solo mum and I'm flipping furniture in Australia so that I can fund my dream home. And since the start of 24, I've been able to save $14,000 for a house deposit, purely flipping pieces of furniture like this one. This piece had some beautiful features, just those handles alone. It had a lovely grain. It did have a lot of scratches up top, and unfortunately it had some structural damage. You can see here there were these soft patches, sort of like a bit of water damage. My first step was to remove the handles, and on a vintage piece like this, sometimes the nails that hold these on can look like screws and that you need a flat nose screwdriver to remove them, but they're actually little nails. The best way I've found to remove these is to get a putty knife underneath the handle, just enough so that you can actually get a screwdriver underneath, and then you wiggle the screwdriver to loosen the screw. And then once it is out far enough, you actually pull it out with a set of pliers. Just be mindful though that the metal on these handles can often be quite thin, so you don't want to be bending it too much out of shape. I knew because of the damage on this piece, I would have to do a pretty substantial repair, but I wanted to maintain a little bit of timber. So I got my carbide scraper out to remove the existing finish off the top of the piece. My top tip when using a carbide scraper is to start with the blade half on, half off the piece and work from one side to the other, overlapping each section. If your carbide scraper is screaming like a banshee, it's most likely that you haven't been able to start the run. So start with that half on, half off the piece and apply more pressure. Once I'd removed what I could with my carbide scraper, I went around and I hand sanded the details on the legs. I wanted the base of this piece to match what I was doing up top. It was then time to give the piece a thorough clean down. I'm using crud cutter here, and I always go around with some plain hot water just to remove any residue because it is a degreaser. I then moved on to sanding. You can see I'm using my orbital sander here, and I have a 120 grit sanding disc, which was sufficient to remove the existing finish that was on this piece. Before I could move on to scuff sanding the rest of the piece and the top, I had to get that repair done on the side. So in order to do this, I wanted to have a little bit of support behind so that I could fill it with Bondo and it not be moving around. So I cut a piece of timber down and I glued it into place, and then I had to chock it up with another piece of timber because I couldn't get a clamp in there. While it was drying, I moved on to the top of the piece, sanding down with 80 grit sandpaper first because I had some deeper scuffs and scratches, and then bumped up to 120, followed by 180, finishing with 240 grit sandpaper. The only time that I will ever use 80 grit sandpaper is if I have scratches or scuffs like this. Most of the time I will use a 120 grit sandpaper, and that is purely because the lower the grade of sandpaper, the coarser it is, and you might think that you are removing the finish a lot quicker, but what you're actually doing is creating micro scratches or pigtail swirls in the timber, which take a lot of time to sand back out later on. 120 grit sandpaper also creates less friction between the sandpaper disc and the finish that you're trying to remove, so you're less likely to gunk them up with the product that's actually melting because of that friction. Once I'd sanded down the top, I sanded all of the doors as well, only scuff sanding though with 120 grit because they are the sections that I was going to be painting. I also did the sides of the drawers because I wanted to stain those the same color as the top and the base, and then finally I did a 120 grit scuff sand over the body of the piece as well. The side section was a little bit spongy still, so I decided that I would put some glue in the front as well. This is a quick set glue by Sealy's. If you're looking for it, it is the one with the little wooden plane on the front, and it sets fast. So I just made sure that I was using that putty knife just to pry it open a little bit so that the glue would run down, and then I did a water cleanup. While that was setting, I moved on to priming. I'm priming the drawers here. You can see that I've just taped off the side where that dovetail is, and I'm using a piece of cardboard to create a bit of a barrier so that I am not getting any overspray. Now, you can do this or you can tape everything off, but I find that this is a fast and effective way to actually stop the overspray, and that paper that you can see flapping around there was already in the drawers when I got it. To repair the spongy patch, I mixed up a 2-part gap filler, worked it into all of those little fine cracks and let it dry before sanding it down completely smooth. 2-part gap filler is amazing for filling splits in timber if you have fine cracks like this, little holes, little dents, but it does sand down white, so just keep that in mind. This is something that you would be putting under a painted finish. After removing all of the dust from sanding down that repair, I taped off the legs and the top of the piece and then applied 1 coat of Zinsser water-based primer to the rest of the body. If you want to learn more about painting furniture, maybe you don't know what primers to use, what paints to use, different ratios and application styles, then I've got some fantastic resources through the link in my bio which will teach you everything that you need to know. My guides are easily digested, they're beginner friendly, and I share all of my tips and tricks so that you can save time and money without cutting corners. Once my primer was completely dry, I went around with an 800 grit sanding pad. Now, that might sound like a very high grade of sandpaper, but this will just knock down any texture that the spray has created, any dust, anything that may have flown into the paintwork while it was drying, and it will give you the smoothest finish possible. I like to do this between all of my coats, so between my primer, my paint, and my second coat of paint, removing the dust each time with the vacuum cleaner. It was then time to get my first coat of paint on. I'm overlapping each section with my Wagner spray gun, and for this piece I chose to paint the interior as well. I don't do this every time, but I did feel that this piece needed to be painted inside. I wanted an aged brass look for these beautiful handles, so I chose Rub and Buff in the color European Gold. To complement that beautiful green tone, I wanted to add some depth of color to the top and the base, so I went in with FIDDES tinted hard wax oil in the color Rustic Oak. FIDDES hard wax oil is incredibly durable. This will not craze or crack over time like some polyurethane can, and it comes in a range of colors. But what I like the most about it is how easy it is to apply and the fact that it's toy safe and food safe, so it's great to have around your little people. I did 1 coat of the Rustic Oak on the bottom, but FIDDES actually have a matte clear hard wax oil as well. So for my second coat up top, I actually did a 50-50 of the Rustic Oak and just the matte clear to make sure that I wasn't getting too much depth of color there, but I was still getting a highly durable finish. You can find out more information about FIDDES products through the link in my bio. Just scroll down and I've linked their website there. This is by far my favorite part of the flip, and it was my final step, putting the hardware back on. I'm just tapping those nails back into place, making sure to be careful. Obviously, we don't want to chip the paintwork. And guys, this is the end result. It's such a classic color combination. And if you've been following me for a while, you know I don't normally do a dark timber top, but that Rustic Oak with the green and the aged brass handles just works. It gives me old world library vibes, but I'd love to know what you guys think, so jump in the comments, let me know, is this one a nail or a fail?